In Kenya, there has been a sharp escalation in a standoff between the government and the judiciary. Last week, the country's interior minister and police chief were both fined for contempt of court for failing to obey a judge's order to free an opposition politician who was being held at the nation's main airport. Miguna, who holds dual Canadian citizenship, was detained after he flew into Nairobi last Wednesday and held at the airport. A court ordered his release, but the government continued detaining him. Hours later, Miguna was placed on an Emirates flight to Dubai. It's the second time he's been deported this year. Opposition groups and activists have repeatedly accused the government of failing to respect the authority of the courts in political matters, a charge the government denies. For analysis on the situation in Kenya, I'm joined by David Monda. He's an analyst and professor at City University of New York. Welcome to our Washington studios, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
Now, here's the big question. Is the government at war with the judiciary in Kenya, in your assessment?
I think there's a tension. I wouldn't put it as an escalation to the point of a war, but there seems to be a tension between the judiciary and the government. Yeah. On the government's part, they feel that Miguna is not following procedure, that he is not allowing for his passport to be stamped at the gateway, and he's not following immigration procedures to get into the country. Mm-hmm. On the part of the judiciary, they feel the government's not respecting the separation of powers and the powers of the judiciary to issue those court orders and interpret the law, and for the government to actually be able to follow up on those judicial decisions.
Yeah, but also we saw the government disregard court orders even in relation to the media. Some months back when the media was shut down, the courts made certain rulings and the government ignored that. Now, should Kenyans be concerned about the future of the law, of the constitution of the country?
I think Kenya should be very concerned about that. Let's not forget that Kenya is in a democratic transition. We've come from many, many years of impunity and of disregard for the law from previous administrations since independence. So as they say, old habits die hard. And it seems that some of these habits have still not been shaken off in terms of government policy. What's specifically interesting with the Miguna situation is that a lot of this situation has been very much personalized. As you can imagine, Miguna is a very combative and confrontational individual. That's just his style of playing politics. Yeah. And it seems that that has rubbed certain individuals in the government the wrong way. So you really see a lot of judicial edicts being passed and judicial orders being passed. But it's really taken a very political angle in terms of how the government's seeing the law and how it's choosing what orders to follow and which ones to disregard.
In fact, some people are expecting that because of the handshake between President Kenyatta and Mr. Raila Odinga of the opposition, then this could have actually resolved some of these matters, including the Miguna issue. What do you make of the handshake?
I think a lot of analysts are very skeptical about the handshake. I mean, on the surface of it, it seems very, very good sort of for the transition in terms of calming the nation down. But what exactly does that handshake entail? It really reemphasizes this idea that in Kenya and many of our African countries, a lot of our politics is very transactional, which emphasizes a handshake rather than transformational in terms of really addressing some of the core issues of that our societies suffer from. Issues of corruption, issues of governance, and issues of the independence of the judiciary. So going forward, it's really important to think about exactly how the judiciary and the government will interact, so that we don't have this power escalation and power struggle between the two arms of government, because ultimately it's the mwananchi, it's the regular Kenyan citizen.
Because the law is there to protect all of us, whether someone is in power today and tomorrow they're out. The law should be protecting everybody, right?
Ultimately, that's very true, but essentially the law really protects the weak, because the powerful already have the power, the government on their side. Ultimately, the law is supposed to cover everybody, but in particular, it's supposed to protect the weak, because those are the people who run to the courts to seek redress when some of the powers of government are overstepped. And this Miguna situation is actually pretty unfortunate. But going forward, to what extent will the handshake actually lead to a transition to actually address some of the core issues that have been of big concern? Issues of electoral reform, issues of independence of the judiciary, and issues of corruption in the government.
Okay. We'll talk about that some more later on. I want to thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Today. All right, that's David Monda is an analyst and professor at the City University of New York.